She devised a plan to push the queen toward Duke Buckingham purely for amusement. This dreary King Louis XIII didn't care for balls and masquerades, while his lively wife was languishing from boredom. Madame de Chevreuse had another motive as well. By becoming the keeper of the French queen's heart, she gained lifelong influence over her. And that intrigue and power was what the Duchess loved more than anything in the world. Known as the Kid at the French court, she was born in December 1600. At her baptism, she was given several names: Marie Aimée, from the de Rohan family. The girl wasn't a classical beauty, but her vivacity, intelligence, ability to present herself in the best light, flawless skin, and bright eyes made her quite attractive. Dark-haired, graceful, and always ready with a sharp retort, Marie was popular wherever she went. The clever young beauty caught the attention of two notable figures: the Queen Mother, Maria de Medici, and Marquis Charles d'Albert. The former appointed Marie to the court, placing her in the service of the young and of Austria, while the latter married her. The Queen Mother couldn't have devised a worse gift for her daughter-in-law. She had hoped that the new companion would alleviate the Spanish queen's boredom and make her a bit less prim, but it turned out to be much worse. The 17-year-old Marquise turned out to be a capricious, frivolous girl, prone to adventures and confidently bold. The pliable Queen of France and of Austria fell completely under Marie's influence in front of the astonished court. Who was delighted by this? Her newlywed husband. Charles quickly rose through the ranks because King Louis adored his company. The young man shared all the king's interests and eagerly offered new ideas, soon earning the title of Duke of Luynes. Moreover, the favorite landed the most coveted position at court. He became the constable. There was no one more influential in France than Charles de Luynes, and no lady more favored by the queen than Madame de Luynes. These two, Marie and Charles, effectively ruled the country in place of their patrons. At 20, Marie de Luynes gave birth to a son, with the king as his godfather. Shortly after, the happy family moved into a luxurious mansion near the Louvre. The favors showered upon the Duke and Duchess infuriated the monarch's entourage. As they climbed higher, Marie and Charles garnered more and more enemies. But when you reach the top, there's only one way to go down. A year later, the Duke of Luynes fell ill with purple fever, what they called scarlet fever at the time. The best doctors attended to the royal favorite, but they couldn't save him. Madame de Luynes was horrified. She knew Louis's character and understood that his side would not remain vacant for long. How would she influence the king now? What would happen to her? Marie had one defining characteristic. She often made spontaneous decisions. Claude of Lorraine, Duc de Chevreuse, had long pursued her. Although this nobleman was 22 years older than Marie, he held the title of Peer of France and was wealthy. Without waiting for the mourning period to end, Madame de Luynes changed her name. She became the Duchess de Chevreuse. It seemed that everything had returned to normal. Marie was once again shining, guiding the queen's thoughts, and her husband had become the great Chamberlain of France. However, Claude was nothing like Charles de Luynes. He failed to become the king's favorite, and in truth, Marie didn't love him. The attractive young woman had taken on lovers. What a disappointment! The Duc de Chevreuse had no desire to become a cuckold. Problems began for Marie. Moreover, one foolish stunt nearly cost her her place at court. That spring, Queen and of Austria was pregnant, and France was anxiously awaiting the birth of an heir, as the crowned couple had been married for 7 years. And wouldn't you know it, Marie and the Queen decided to take a run through the dark halls of the Louvre. Marie dashed ahead, with the Queen following behind. In the darkness, the king's wife stumbled over an obstacle and fell, resulting in a miscarriage. In a fit of rage, Louis ordered that Marie be barred from seeing his wife. He had never been fond of Louis's wife, but this crossed every line. Hurt and frightened, the young woman locked herself away in her mansion. Soon, she was forgiven and allowed to visit the Queen again. After all, and of Austria was partly to blame for what had happened. But this brief exile only fueled Marie's anger. A thought took root in her pretty head. The king was her enemy. All her subsequent actions only confirmed this belief. When the Duke of Buckingham arrived in Paris, he stayed at Claude de Chevreuse' home. The handsome Englishman remained indifferent to Marie's charms, but the Duchess found another use for his good looks. Why not introduce him to the Queen? It was truly a cunning scheme. Marie hosted a ball at her house. The king declined to attend, citing poor health, but Anne of Austria came. Upon introducing her to Buckingham, Marie realized she had hit the jackpot. The bored queen fell in love with the English duke. From that moment on, Madame de Chevreuse worked tirelessly to orchestrate meetings between the Englishman and her friend. Little did she know that Buckingham was merely playing a role. All she cared about was that the queen was happy. Rumors of the secret romance between Anne of Austria and Buckingham reached the king's ears. That it wasn't just gossip is confirmed in the memoirs of La Rochefoucauld, who later became Marie's lover. He writes, "The Duchess seized every opportunity to enthrall the Queen and the Duke. For this, she tirelessly organized festivities in her home. But the Duke left, and the restless mind of Madame de Chevreuse needed a new outlet. She eagerly joined the conspiracy against the Cardinal and the King. This intricate plot involved prominent figures, Duke Gaston of Orleans, Louis's brother, and the Vendôme brothers, who were also royal relatives, children from the beautiful Gabrielle. When everything was uncovered, each received punishment fitting their status. The common nobleman Betrayal was publicly executed, Gaston was married against his will, and César de Vendôme and his brother were imprisoned in the Bastille. As for Marie, she was exiled. The kid had jumped from intrigue to intrigue so skillfully that it was only a matter of time before she stumbled. Her banishment and the secret letters she sent to the Queen were elegantly described in a novel by Alexandre Dumas. In his version, Madame de Chevreuse became the muse of Aramis. Well, Marie certainly had her fair share of admirers. The exile of the Duchess de Chevreuse lasted about a year, after which she was allowed to return to court. However, it seemed that this was a mistake, as the kid plunged headfirst into all sorts of mischief. The Duchess's intrigues became even more dangerous, both for herself and for everyone she involved, especially for the Queen of France. What madness unfolded during those chaotic years! Louis XIII fell ill, and Madame de Chevreuse was already discussing a potential marriage between Anne of Austria and the king's younger brother. The Duchess was at the heart of a conspiracy led by the Keeper of the Seals, the Marquis de Chateauneuf, who was negotiating with Spain at a time when France was at odds with that nation. Ultimately, Chateauneuf was arrested, but the Duchess managed to evade serious consequences. There were even plans for Anne of Austria to escape to her brother in Madrid. Interestingly, a young prince named de Marsillac, who would later become the famous memoirist La Rochefoucauld, was an active participant in this intrigue. It was certainly unwise to conspire with enemies. When it was discovered that the Queen was corresponding with Spain and that the ever-present Madame de Chevreuse was aiding her, the kid was banished from the kingdom. By the way, about that nickname, it was merely a play on words, as the Duchess's surname sounds like the French word chèvre, which means goat. At 37, the Duchess became a wanderer. She visited Madrid, then toured London, and eventually made her way to Brussels. From there, she corresponded with her former friends, although their replies were rather tepid. The exiled Duchess had incurred too much royal wrath, and no one wanted to get caught up in her troubles. What's more, Louis had taken care of the Duchess in his will. The document contained a specific clause prohibiting Madame de Chevreuse from coming near the borders of France. However, when the long-standing enemies, one after another, departed this world, first Richelieu, then Louis, the Duchess rubbed her hands together in glee. A special decree from the Parliament of Paris allowed the king's will to be overridden, and Madame de Chevreuse returned. She flew to Paris, envisioning a reunion where the Queen would fall into her open arms, and the Duchess would once again wield power in France. But at the Palais Royal, where the royal family had relocated from the Louvre, she was met by a very different woman. Anne of Austria was polite and undoubtedly pleased to see her, but she firmly shut down any attempts to meddle in state affairs. This was all because the new First Minister and Cardinal of France was Giulio Mazarini, and this Italian with a subtle smile seemed to hold the kingdom in his hands. Chevreuse was outraged. Mazarini had placed himself between her and her friend. More precisely, between her and power. What does a duchess do when someone stands in her way? Naturally, she plots a conspiracy. Gathering a circle of discontented allies, Marie de Chevreuse inspired them to join the conspiracy of the important. Every single participant was arrested. Many were exiled, while others ended up in prison. The Duc de Beaufort, for instance, spent 5 years in captivity before he escaped. Once again, Chevreuse avoided serious punishment. She left France. The Queen never forgave the Duchess for that conspiracy. Even when their relationship warmed again, and Madame de Chevreuse managed to return to the French capital once more, and of Austria maintained her distance. The Duchess attempted to charm Mazarini, but he didn't even bat an eye. Madame de Chevreuse set out to find supporters in Parliament, but there were plenty of influential figures there as well. All the levers of power that had once worked so effortlessly for her slipped from her grasp. She had only one card left to play, her daughter, Mademoiselle de Chevreuse. At her mother's behest, this young woman became involved with one of the most notorious schemers of the time, Paul de Gondi. Although the entire capital was aware of their affair, Madame de Chevreuse tried to arrange a marriage between her daughter and Prince de Conti. The young prince's family flatly rejected the Duchess's plans, although Armand de Conti himself had no strong objections. Mademoiselle was quite a charming young lady. However, politics played a role, as civil war, the Fronde, had begun. Madame de Chevreuse shifted her alliances, at times siding with one faction, then another, and even plotting against everyone, which, of course, did nothing for her popularity. In the end, Prince de Conti married a girl from Cardinal Mazarini's family. Mademoiselle de Chevreuse never made it to the altar with anyone. She passed away from illness. The aging schemer found herself unwanted by anyone. She did marry once more, at 57, taking her longtime lover, Geoffrey de Lagle, who served the Duke of Orleans. But this union only amused the Parisians. The groom was a decade younger than his bride, had significant gambling debts, and was likely just looking for a comfortable situation. In her final years, Madame de Chevreuse rarely left her estate in Gagny. The court had forgotten her. New, vibrant young women had emerged. Her former friends didn't rush to visit La Rochefoucauld, having been forgiven by the king for his role in the Civil War, was enjoying his pardon. Prince Condé was also trying to make amends for the storming of Paris. And Anne of Austria had no need for the kid. She died at 79, outliving both her once best friend and Mazarini, the man who had cost her everything. Interestingly, you might be curious to know that Madame de Chevreuse' direct descendants are still alive today.